Okay, today is November 9th. We are at the Petworth Library. My name is Dan Kerr. Would you mind telling me your name?
I'm Peter Stebbins.
Peter, do we have permission to record you?
Yes.
Excellent. Could you tell us what the project is that you're working on in Petworth?
Traffic box art. Yeah, I work for the Lillian Earl and Pilgrim Art Foundation, and we sponsored the traffic box decoration in front of the Petworth Library, and then on the southeast corner of Kenyon and Georgia Avenue.
That's terrific. And what could you tell us about some of those pieces that you've done?
Sure. The two traffic boxes that we did were artwork by Earl Montrose Pilgrim. One is called Untitled 1959 and the other is Untitled 1960. And Earl Pilgrim was a Barbadian American artist who was born in Brooklyn, New York. And in the late 1940s, he met Lily Tuma, who was a Washingtonian that had moved from Washington to New York in 1949. Earl was a jeweler and a painter, and eventually he did avant-garde cinema as well. And Lily partnered with him in art making for the first few years of their relationship when they operated a space in Provincetown, Mass. Lily would make rag dolls and hook rugs, and Earl would teach jewelry making in community centers in the wintertime and then paint and show other artists as well during the summer.
That's terrific. And so what brought you to bring those pieces of art here and put them in a traffic box?
That's a really good story. I live in Mount Pleasant, and I have a community garden plot in Fort Totten. And Lily and I, we encountered one another in 1986. And the way that we first met one another was at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. My late partner was an African-American artist, David Jameson. And during the summers in college, we would go to Provincetown where he would paint. And Earl Pilgrim, Lily's husband, was a Provincetown artist in the 1950s. And Dave immediately learned about Earl's work because of a Dorothy Gee Seckler book that had been published, and because Earl loomed large in the myth and lore of Provincetown, and he was an African diaspora artist like Dave, and he was figurative. In the summer of 1986, the Art Association did a show about 4 black artists with a significant impact in 20th century Provincetown, and Earl was one of them. And I was a volunteer at the Art Association, and it fell on me to do the bartending that night, and I closed up the gallery. And in closing up the gallery, both Lily and Dave were lingering, and we didn't know one another, and so it came upon me to sort of flick the lights and politely explain that the gallery was closing. I didn't think about that again until about 10 years later, when one of Dave's paintings went into the Corcoran, and Lily and I were consulting with the same art dealer in Provincetown unbeknownst to us, and Julie called and said, "Earl Pilgrim's widow lives in Washington and she's in the book. I think you should call her and invite her to the show." And I did. And when we met at the museum, we quickly realized that we were familiar, and by the end of the afternoon had placed that encounter as being our first meeting. Lily died in 2017, and in the last year of her life she established the Lillian Earl and Pilgrim Art Foundation, dedicated to Earl's artwork. And I was, in the summer of 18, traveling between Mount Pleasant and Fort Totten to the community garden, and I would often come through Upshur Street. And one afternoon when I came back from the garden, I stopped at Midlands. And at Midlands, I saw a Georgia Avenue Thrive call for sponsorship of traffic box art. And in that moment, I realized I knew that Lily's last family home had been somewhere on Kansas Avenue, and I know that Georgia Avenue has a long legacy of Caribbean heritage. I first moved to Washington in the fall of 1988, and I can remember during the first decade or more of being in DC of an annual Caribbean carnival parade and festival that happened along Georgia Avenue. So yeah, my first thought, I hadn't even finished reading the ad or call for sponsorship when I thought, oh, this is perfect. Earl's legacy as a Caribbean artist will connect to the historic Georgia Avenue corridor, and Lily's having grown up here. This will also be a terrific way to memorialize her and celebrate her life. So I reached out and offered the foundation sponsorship. The other board members of the foundation were in accord, and Georgia Avenue Thrive was thrilled. So we started the project in the summer of July of 2018.
It's terrific.
Yeah, and throughout it was a long, complicated process because traffic box decorating had not really happened, and many people don't even really think about what these things are, but they're gray metal boxes that are at most intersections where traffic lights are found, and they essentially hold the guts of the traffic light. And in DC, more than one entity controls the traffic box. The inside is somebody's business and the outside is somebody else's business, and then the turf that it's on might also involve another party. So it was not an easy task to figure out which permit to find and where to file it, and necessarily, I don't know, possibly even create it. That was all Georgia Avenue Thrive's administrative task. But along the way, in the first few years of the foundation, I really came to rely on the public library and the programming that the library has been doing based upon community history and archiving and family records and memories. So I learned how to digitize old video cassette tapes that we had in the studio house, and I learned ideas about organizing digital records, which I had never done before, and I learned about oral history and ways to gather oral histories. And all of these programs that I did through the library, I really found myself using in preparation for the installation of this public art. There was a lot about Lily's family that I did not know. She left home, she was born in 1928, and in January of her last record of being in Washington, D.C. is December of 1948. And she did not return to D.C. until after her husband Earl had died. And was very circumspect about her background. So I knew that she was born in Niagara Falls. I knew that she came to Washington in 1934. And I knew that she left in 1948. And it was through city directories, census records, Washington Star and Washington Post archives, all found digitally through the DC Public Library, that I was able to find out this more complete story, and then to learn more about Petworth and the District of Columbia and its 20th century development in an era of segregation and desegregation. So it's been fascinating what I know about Mount Pleasant now. I mean, Petworth now, that I didn't know before.
So could you tell us about the process of creating these traffic box art installation pieces?
Okay, the traffic boxes, each traffic box is roughly 4 or 5 feet tall and 2 or 3 feet. So they're pretty large. And the artwork, these are both they're both oil paintings One is oil on luan, and luan is the material that wood paneling is made out of. So it's a plywood kind of material that's made with a tropical wood. It's very thin and light. And then the other is oil on canvas, and they're small. So roughly the traffic boxes in front of the Petworth Library are coming from an artwork that is only about 12 or 14 inches high and maybe 18 or 24 inches long. And then the piece that is at the southeast corner of Georgia and Kenyon is only about 18 by 22 inches. So they were captured, which is a new word for me, but Old Town Editions in Alexandria digitally captured the artwork in a high resolution image. So a lot of times the pictures that you see, that you make with your camera and that you share with your friends with your phone and stuff, those are JPEGs. And then there's a larger one is a TIFF, and then there's even another one in there, and I can't remember it right now. But the way that the artwork went from being oil on luan or canvas and tiny to being enormous and stretched on these boxes started with a digital capture, which I would have called a picture, but in the industry it's captured. And then those files are sent electronically to the fabricator, and the fabricator in this case was in Montana, and then they print them out on a large, it's easiest to describe it as contact paper. You know, they print it out on a large surface that's adhesive on one side, and then the artwork is visible on the other. And then they are shipped to the installer, and then the installer familiarizes themselves with the actual box upon which they'll be applied, and a series of cuts and alterations are required in order for the artwork to actually fit around the box and for the boxes to still be functionable. So there are ventilation holes that are necessary, and there are circles that need to be removed and hinges that need to be accommodated. So it's actually pretty technical.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that whole process took a year and several months?
To actually take the picture and make the artwork and put it on the box did not take that long. That was pretty quick. The two longest processes were accomplishing all of the paperwork and permissions, really. And then the other was trying to figure out. One box was easy because it was one piece of art and it was one box and it was very abstract. And, I have this thing about artwork. I'm an English and French major, but I took a lot of art history and spent a lot of time around artists. And one thing that we would say in college, and I still do, is if you can go to a piece of art and just isolate a little section and it looks good, you've got a solid work. So in other words, there's the whole experience of seeing the artwork, but then there's the experience of just saying, well, what if I just did this? Whoa, yeah, this is good. And I can feel pretty confident about Earl's artwork, that you can, any way you slice it up, you're going to get something good. So with the abstract painting in one box, it was no problem. Slap it on there, it'll be fine. But in front of the library, it's 3 boxes. So it's one piece of art to divide over 3, and this took a long time. The first time the images were sent to the designers, Earl was a figurative artist, and as he evolved in his practice, his work introduced a lot of abstract elements, and the painting in front of the library is the beginning of this departure or it's not departure. It's the beginning of opening up to a more abstract composition. And the first time the image came back, it was wiped out and lost. So I think she had just sort of like loaded up the file and matched it up to where it needed to go and sent it, and that's what we got. So I did this whole thing where I made little construction maquettes of the traffic boxes, and then I printed out the painting, and then I cut it up and fitted on the boxes how it would be. And the idea is that abstract painting actually has a lot of figurative elements that are all various groups of solo or groups of people. And the three boxes are perfect to create this triptych that shows you on the left you have a turbaned individual, in the center you have a family group, and then on the right you have a couple. And then at either end, for the orientation of these boxes, facing north or south, you have solo figures. And it was a terrific experience because many people, when they see the artwork, it's almost like, would you call it a Rorschach test, when you look at something and you see something or you don't see something? But it is that experience. A lot of the times people are more involved in the color and the arrangement of the shapes, and then other people will immediately see the guy with the turban, the family group, the lovers.
That's great. Wow. So how do you feel today's gone and the reception? What's been the reception of various folks who have come and talked to you about it?
It's been really good. Yeah, it's been really good. And one of the things that I was happy about today's program is that I had done all of this research to know more about Lily and Earl and know more about ways in which they connect to the neighborhood. And for me, it was this incredibly broadening of the impact of Caribbean culture. Not only the Caribbean culture that is in DC, but the Caribbean culture that surrounds, and the impact of our Caribbean culture that goes all the way to Montreal from my research, and all the way to the Caribbean. The annual festival phenomenon, which today is no longer a Washington-based event. It's now partnered, so it's sort of a Baltimore, Washington area. So the Caribbean Fest still continues, but people will travel to the Baltimore area for it. And what was terrific was this week, getting ready for today, I had a lot of digital information that I found and printed it all out, and that's the display in the library. And it's been fascinating, the people that are coming from the neighborhood, because they're familiar with the images and ideas that we've shared of community archiving and community history and focusing on the Caribbean past, but we're also learning more about ways in which the neighborhood is used today.
Thank you very much. Any last thoughts you want to share?
I hope that the notion of decorating traffic boxes becomes something of a citywide program. It has in surrounding areas of the Washington area, and it has certainly been a big thing on the West Coast and west of the Rockies, where I think it just kind of organically grew. And I hope that through this project, we'll have an impact on any more organized citywide effort to decorate traffic boxes so that they actually reflect the neighborhood history where they are and the culture that comes out of that neighborhood.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.